The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints builds temples, sacred, beautiful buildings, more than 140 of them all over the earth, dotting the earth. And on most of them at the top is a steeple, and on top of the steeple is a statue of the angel Moroni, who was an actual prophet who lived in the American continent anciently, and his story is written in the Book of Mormon. And Moroni has to his lips a trumpet, and that is the symbol of his spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the earth. When Moroni was alive, he was a Nephite, and the Nephites were at war with people called the Lamanites, and the Nephites were pretty well annihilated. And his father, whose name was Mormon, and Moroni were the last two left alive of the Nephites. They lived a long time after that. They were alone. They always had to be in hiding, or they would, be hunted down. And Mormon died first, and Moroni ended up being alone for 36, 37 years. And he probably lived, they figured, to 70 or 80 years of age. So Moroni was a wonderful, wonderful person. And his story is told in this article by Elder Glenn L. Rudd, R-U-D-D. It's The Angel Moroni is what he titled it. It actually was a BYU Idaho devotional given in March of 2003. And so if you go to byui.edu, you can, and search for this talk, you can find it in text. I have not found it as a video, so I don't know if the video is still available or not, but you can get the text. And it's a long article, so I'm going to just take from it some points that I think will be of interest to you. Both Mormon and Moroni wrote in the Book of Mormon, according to Brother Rudd, well, and according to the Book of Mormon, it's there. They had been visited by the Savior of the world, and they wrote that, and also by the three Nephites. The three Nephites were apostles who had asked permission of Christ when he came to visit the American continent here, to remain on the earth until his second coming, till he returned, and to do missionary work. So they are still roaming the earth. Normally people don't know who they are, what they've done, but they're conducting small miracles all the time, I suppose, and spreading the gospel in whatever way. Moroni testified, "My father and I have seen them, and they have ministered to us." So if they've ministered unto them, I hope that means that in all those lonely years that they were protected by those three Nephites, and that they were visited, so it wasn't quite so lonely for them. Moroni also wrote, "I have seen Jesus. He talked with me face to face, and in plain humility, even as a man telleth another in his own language." So Moroni did have that visitation. Moroni was a resurrected being, and he is a resurrected being. Most recently, he is the most recently resurrected person we know of. And we do know that on the 21st day of September in 1823, he appeared at the bedside of the prophet Joseph Smith, who was still a young person at that time. That was 3 years after the Father and the Son actually visited Joseph Smith. He had gone into the grove behind his home that we now refer to as the Sacred Grove. He'd gone there to pray and ask which church he should join. He had read in the Bible that he should ask, and he would not be upbraided. And so he did that, and the Father and the Son appeared to him. 3 years later, Moroni appeared, and that began the restoration of the gospel. Others who were visited by Moroni, according to Brother Rudd, included Orson Hyde. Orson Hyde was one of the original 12 apostles selected by Joseph Smith. After Joseph Smith was martyred, then Orson Hyde served under Brigham Young as an apostle, and then John Taylor, who also became the prophet. He was one of the great apostles of this dispensation, and he gave a talk in Salt Lake at the Tabernacle. That was not the Tabernacle there now, that was the early Tabernacle, July 4th, 1854. The saints had only been in Utah for 7 years. They had been in Nauvoo, and they were persecuted and had to leave Nauvoo. And they had come to Utah. Now, Utah was not a state. At that time, it was just a territory. Nevertheless, in spite of all the persecution, the saints in Utah still revered the Constitution of the United States, still wanted to be a state. And so this was a very patriotic talk about America that Brother Hyde gave. He said that Moroni was the guardian angel of America. So he is very special to us. And he said that same angel of God that appeared to Joseph Smith presides over the destiny of the United States of America. He was in the camp with George Washington and helped Washington when he had trouble. He was also with Christopher Columbus and gave him deep impressions and dreams and visions respecting the New World on the stormy deep. He was with him on the stormy deep, guided his frail vessel to the desired haven, and he calmed the troubled elements. So Moroni has been very busy on the other side of the veil helping America be established. We honor Moroni, says Brother Rudd. There are 14 Latter-day Saint hymns that have been written about him. Moroni walked across this American continent. The events of that war that he was in, and so when he was still alive, probably were on the eastern part of the United States. And so he walked all the way to Utah, what would become Utah, and he designated the place where the St. George Temple was to be built. That St. George Temple is very important in Utah history. He also designated where the Manti Temple would be built, which is north of St. George, also in Utah. And he also designated the Kirtland Temple and the Nauvoo Temple. Those were the two earliest temples, and they were both destroyed by enemies of the church. And Brother Rudd says probably there were others that he designated. He appeared to the prophet Joseph Smith, not just that one time when he was probably 17, but 22 times that we know of, and maybe more. He appeared to Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, and that's well known. They were witnesses to the restoration of the gospel and the Book of Mormon. He appeared to Emma Smith, the wife of Joseph Smith. He appeared to Mary Whitmer, who was the mother of David Whitmer, who was one of those early witnesses, and also to 4 other of the Whitmer family, 4 other members, probably men, of the Whitmer family. And the reason for that was in, I believe it was 1830, the church was organized formally, and that meeting was held in the Whitmer home. And it may have gone on for some time, I don't know, but the story, and the church has done a video of this, so you may be able to find it. Sister Whitmore, Mary, she was having to do all the work to feed and care for all these men that had come to organize this church, and she was very worn out and very overwhelmed by it. And she went out in the barn to milk a cow, and the angel Moroni came and appeared to her and showed her the plates from which the Book of Mormon that had been written by Mormon, and Joseph Smith had translated into English. And he gave her a testimony that she never forgot. Also, Luke Johnson, who came early with Brigham Young in that advance company that came to Salt Lake. Lucy Harris, the wife of Martin Harris, that will be a surprise to most members of the church. he came to her in a dream and bore his testimony of the Book of Mormon. Zerah Pulsifer, he was a minister in some other church and joined the church and had a visit from Moroni. And he also shared the gospel with Wilford Woodruff and baptized him as a member of the church. And of course, he became one of the prophets. W. Phelps saw Moroni. He wrote the song Praise to the Man Who Communes with Jehovah. And what I love about that song is there's a line in the chorus, so we sing it several times when we sing the song. And it says, and Joseph was martyred, and so this line says, mingling with gods, he can plan for his brethren. So that would include us. Mingling with gods, he's planning for our life on this earth. He is the head of this dispensation of times. John Green, the wife of Rhoda Green, they each had a visit from Moroni. Rhoda was the sister of Brigham Young. So it's nice when people in the same family have visitations that they can share. John Taylor, who became a prophet, before he joined the church, he had a visit from Moroni who had the trumpet in his mouth. He saw that, and it made no sense to him. Why a trumpet? Until after he joined the church. Oliver Granger, Moroni actually knelt down and prayed with him and put his arm on the man's back so that he could feel him. Heber C. Kimball was one of the original prophets in Joseph Smith's day, or one of the original apostles, and he became a counselor in the first presidency of Brigham Young. Just before he died, he had a visit from Moroni, who told him that his work on the earth was finished, and on the morrow he'd be gone. And then Brother Rudd says there is one more that he is very sure was visited by Moroni, but he has not yet found the actual proof for it. But he says in his own mind, he is sure that Hiram Smith was visited by Moroni. So that's nice that Hiram and Joseph, who worked so well together, were able to save that or share that vision. Now, I just want to tell you the story of the eminent men of Wilford Woodruff, and that's depicted in pictures, and several different pictures. And so I assume that everybody knows that this group of the Founding Fathers and other people who worked for liberty in America, and some of their wives and children and so forth, visited Wilford Woodruff in the St. George Temple. Now, the St. George Temple, the reason it's so important is because of that visit, but beyond that, the Salt Lake City Temple was started but was not completed. It was a big temple and would take longer. So Brigham Young had the St. George Temple, a small temple, built so that they could be doing the work that needs to be done for people who'd passed on and didn't have that opportunity to be baptized as was in the restored manner. And so somebody can do that as a proxy for them. And more work was done in this temple than additional ordinances that were not performed in earlier ones. So we will see here that that happened. So these men appeared to him, to President Wilford Woodruff, in the temple in St. George. And I'm going to quote President Benson here from several different sources because he's told the story more than once, and I'll just break it up a little bit. He said, sacred temple ordinances were performed vicariously in the temple for 100 men and 50 women. President Woodruff and others went to the waters of the baptismal font and were baptized and had hands laid on their heads for the pronouncement of blessings on behalf of those who had shed their flesh, but not their love of liberty. And of course, all of them didn't really literally shed their flesh, but they had worked for liberty. And then he says, I saw with my own eyes the record of the work which was done for the founding fathers of this great nation, beginning with George Washington. That was one of the very highlights of President Benson's life, when he was able to see the records. And as far as I know, he was the only one who had that experience in our, our day. So he wrote, "Ever since I returned as a humble missionary," and this was his first mission as a youth, so he would have been 21, "and first learned that the founding fathers had appeared in that temple, I wanted to see the records, and I saw the record." And this is how it happened. "Shortly after Spencer W. Kimball became the president of the church, he assigned me to go into the vault of the St. George Temple and check the early records." Can you imagine how happy that assignment made him? The assignment was actually go to St. George and preside over a stake temple there. While you're there, will you go check the records? It must have been just thrilling for him. He had been waiting since the time he was 21, and this would have been in 1974, maybe 75, 50 years, well over 50 years. That had been his dream. "And there is in the St. George Temple, I saw what I had always, and there in the St. George Temple, I saw what I had always hoped and prayed that someday I would see, and I saw the record." They did appear to Wilford Woodruff twice and asked why the work hadn't been done for them. They had founded this country and the constitution of this land, and they had been true to those principles. "In the archives of the temple, I saw in a book, in bold handwriting, names of the founding fathers and others, including Columbus and other great Americans for whom the work had been done in the house of the Lord. All these appeared to Wilford Woodruff when he was president of the St. George Temple. President George Washington was ordained a high priest at that time. You'll also be interested to know that according to Wilford Woodruff's journal, John Wesley, Benjamin Franklin, and Christopher Columbus were also ordained high priests at this time." So 4 of them, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Wesley, and Christopher Columbus. Wesley had been a preacher in Europe, and so many people had attended his sermons and so forth, and mostly in the open fields, I believe, and were so prepared that when the missionaries, when Joseph Smith restored the church and the missionaries went over to Europe, these people were ready and whole congregations joined. So they were made high priests, and this was the temple where that was introduced. And they are in some way leaders, I assume, of what is going on right now. Let's see. This is President Benson. "This is all one great program on both sides of the veil. I think the Lord expects us to take an active part in preserving the Constitution and our freedom." I think so. Do you think so? I mean, think about it. Who orchestrated that on the other side? If it was not Joseph Smith, that visit, because he is the head of this dispensation of time. Moroni, who is the guardian of America, surely he was involved. And interestingly, Brigham Young, who had been sick for quite a long time, when those founding fathers came to the temple to talk to Wilford Woodruff, Brigham Young died within a week or so after that. So for whatever's going on, whatever they were beginning, whatever part of history on that side of the veil was going on, Brigham Young certainly was a part of it. And of course now, isn't President Benson a part of that? Let me say this again. This is all one great program on both sides of the veil. And he says, I think the Lord expects us to take an active part in preserving the Constitution and our freedom. Thanks.